by Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York District 14 and Senator Ed Markey from Massachusetts that outlines a plan for the United States to be on 100% renewable energy by 2030, and also to ensure that marginalized communities aren't thrown to the side as they have been for centuries.
Yeah, an important thing to note, which was mentioned in the video, is that the Green New Deal is not a law. It's a proposal, and knowing that is important. What that means is that every section within it is simply talking about the issues that need to be addressed with proposed solutions, and that further policy should be written to actually turn the Green New Deal into action. All of the Green New Deal data is pulled from the United Nations October 2018 special report on global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius. It outlines the many economic, social, and environmental disasters that will occur if immediate action is not taken. First of all, we all know that climate change is already directly hurting people, as the stories that we shared earlier. Wildfires have destroyed homes, lives, and contaminated our air. Hurricanes, floods, droughts, and typhoons have escalated in the past year. But simply recognizing that climate change is real isn't enough. We have the choice and the chance to change the path we are on right now and save our planet and our future. Air pollution, which disproportionately affects people of color, shown in this graph, is incredibly crucial for everyone's health. We all need to breathe, but because of warming temperatures and more wildfires, clean air might become a luxury. Chemicals in our food and water can lead to diseases and death, and this mainly happens in communities of color and low-income communities. And because minorities, and especially people of color, are already often vulnerable and unable to access healthcare, housing, and good infrastructure, climate change will have an even more negative impact on them. So the Green New Deal calls for many changes to be in the US policy to be made to support what it calls frontline and vulnerable communities. As climate change progresses and these critical issues get worse, those people on the front lines will become more and more at risk. So the Green New Deal wants to make sure that they are explicitly addressed as people needing assistance.
So one thing that isn't intensely explained in the video is exactly what the environmental costs will be if immediate change isn't taken right now. So we're going to go into that. In my experience, there are a lot of climate activists that I know who understand that climate change is an issue, but don't really understand exactly what the whole science behind it is, other than very baseline. And that's totally fine. I'm a little bit of a science nerd, so I definitely know a little more than just your average person. However, I want to sort of go into two major parts about it that I feel like are important to understand. So the first main concept is that Earth is a closed system. If you know what that is, maybe you studied ecosystems in biology, it basically means that all the functions of a system are dependent on the different components within that system. In our case, the Earth's atmosphere encloses our Earth, so while we exist in a universe much greater than the size of just our planet, all of the functions of life exist within the sphere of Earth's atmosphere and are dependent on factors and conditions also within that closed sphere. This means that when one thing goes wrong, it will affect everything else as well. A really good example of this is the last ice age. So our ocean currents work to regulate the temperatures of our planet by shifting cold and warm water around. And when something causes a change in that cycle, it majorly affects weather patterns in the world, which is what happened with the last ice age. Although scientists haven't conclusively decided what exactly was the cause of the shift in the Gulf Stream, which is this current here depicted in this graph, which is very important to regulating our planet. They do know that the flow of warm water to the north of the planet from the equator, which keeps places like England warmer, because as you can see, England and Northern Europe is all on the same latitude as Alaska. So you would think that they would be just as cold as Alaska is, but they're kept warm by the Gulf Stream. So that was stopped, which plunged the world into thousands of years of winter. Right now, scientists are worried about that happening again, because part of the balance of that system is due to water density and how that affects currents. In general, cold water is denser, and so when warm water from the Gulf of Mexico flows north, it flows up and over the cold water, and the cold water drops below. So the surface water warms the area atop, like where the land around where the surface water is. But as glaciers melt and the salinity levels drop, which is the salt concentration in the water, the cold Arctic water gets less and less dense because now there's less solutes dissolved in it, which could lead to it not dropping under the flow of the Gulf Stream, therefore interrupting that entire system of warm water flowing up there. In a nutshell, that means that Europe could go into another ice age, which, as you can imagine, would be very bad. Yeah, people, like, the infrastructure there is not built for that. That would be really bad. So, according to NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the ocean absorbs about 30% of atmospheric CO2. And so now I'm going to talk about ocean acidification, which is another slightly different component, but also very important. And so naturally, as CO2 levels from fossil fuels and everything go up, so does the amount of CO2 that the ocean is absorbing. When CO2 gets absorbed by the ocean, it dissolves into carbonic acid, which is shown in this little graphic right here, which then further breaks down into hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions. The process is slowly driving down the pH of the ocean. As you might know, the pH scale goes from acidity to neutral to basic, and neutral is like water, about 7, pH 7. The ocean is actually a little bit basic, so it's not quite 7, but as more carbon dioxide is absorbed, it's becoming more and more acidic, which is bad because certain chemical processes can only happen at a certain pH level. This is bad for a lot of reasons, and one is that it means animals who depend on calcium to form protective shells, like clams and oysters, there are many others as well, will be less likely to do so, which drives down their populations, which you might not think is a big deal, but the food webs of the ocean are incredibly complex, and this will have a big effect on other species who depend on them for food. Lower pH levels also mean that some species of fish won't be able to survive because they can't survive the higher levels of acidity in the water, which is bad for us because millions of humans around the globe depend on the sea for food. Bottom line, if ocean acidification continues, it will majorly affect the global economy and the millions of lives that rely on the seafood and the ocean for resources. And of course, these are only just very brief overview of 2 specific issues. There are thousands of others, and it would take years and years to fully understand it. But I just wanted to talk about these 2 since I feel like they're especially important, and a little bit of like bigger ones right here. Okay.
Yeah. So our economy is based on the stability of a workforce and resources. So it's reasonable conclusion that if we don't do anything to stop the environmental deficits of climate change, the economy will be severely negatively impacted. We rely on trees for paper, lumber, and to build houses. We need water to survive, grow our food. We need fertile land for agriculture and healthy ecosystems to maintain a stable and livable environment. According to this article published in 2019, the global economy will drop significantly in GDP output by 2050, effectively losing $7.9 trillion. All of this money adds up from the damages from storms and other extreme weather as it gets worse. We will have to pay to move people, to build houses, to rebuild what was lost by the natural disasters. And more money from governments will be needed to repair and rebuild. More mass migration will occur, especially in Asian countries that are still developing, like Bangladesh and all those countries where they're already in a vulnerable place, and it will just get very bad. Our economy is currently reliant on mostly fossil fuels and cheap international labor, which might have made few people very, very rich, but it is not sustainable and will end one way or another, either by productive change or by running itself into the ground as the effects of climate change worsen. So many things in the past and present had to go right to get us where we are in this moment. Humans are so developed and intelligent, and although we mess things up a lot of the time, we have the capability to rise above ourselves and fix our messes. You guys are all taking the right steps by being here today, and I encourage you to not be discouraged by climate change and like everything seems like we're doomed, but we really have a chance here, and just keep on doing what you're doing and encouraging your family and friends to make small but impactful changes in their lives. And so now, if you guys have any questions or discussions, we have about 6 minutes to talk and just discuss about what we learned today.
Yeah. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. I do really encourage you guys to read the bill. It's very interesting and will give you a bigger scope. And I do want to reiterate, I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with like how policy works, but the Green New Deal, it's not a law. Basically, it's like a suggestion. Basically, they submit it to Congress and it acts as sort of a guidebook, like a recipe book for creating actual laws and policies that will address the issues that are described in it. So it'll still be a lot of work to actually implement everything that the Green New Deal talks about. But I think it's a pretty good overview and a general like, hey guys, we need to do something. So yeah. Anybody have any questions or anything like that?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you mentioned how there's a lot of opposition from the right, and there's a lot of Republican senators and Congress people who oppose this. What can we as students do to try to convince them, or even what are other politicians doing on the national level to convince people that this is the right thing to do?
Well, I think there's a lot of parts that go into that. In general, I think just public pressure is a great one. There are a lot of organizations that deal specifically with like political campaigning. As I said before, I worked for Sunrise Movement for a few years when I first got involved with climate activism, and Sunrise Movement is really big on like campaigning and in general just like the political aspect of it. So if you really were interested in wanting to do that, Sunrise Movement hosts phone banking sessions, especially around election times. They were majorly instrumental in supporting AOC and many other politicians that they feel are going to be really vital in the fight for climate action in the government. And so if you want to get involved that way, Sunrise Movement is a great one. There are others as well. And just in general, like reaching out to any political advocacy groups that are around your area, wherever you are. I could definitely, like, if somebody is specifically interested in that, you can talk to me and we can figure out exactly what's a good one for wherever you are. But I definitely encourage Sunrise Movement, and they have a really great training sessions. If you look at their website, I can put it in the chat. They have a lot.
Yeah. Also, just when you are of age, like voting for people who you know are going to have like a climate plan or following science, and if you're not of age to vote, like encouraging parents and families like and educating them on like, oh, this person is doing this and this is why you should vote for them, or like things like that.
Yeah, and go to marches whenever they happen again.
Yeah.
I don't. The last march that I went to in September of 2019 in San Francisco, I think that had like over 10,000 people, which was amazing. It was so cool. I have my sign, "School Strike for Climate," on my wall behind me. Yeah. Anyone else have any questions?
Yeah. Any questions?
Yes, thank you, Catherine. Perfect. That was a great question. Thank you, Alyssa. Okay. Well, we only have a few more minutes. So remember, before you leave, if you signed up for a lunch discussion, remember to go to that. Yeah, and then remember your next workshop is after that. I think it starts at,
Yeah.
I should know.
Thank you everyone for coming. I hope that you guys all enjoyed it and learned something and are able to have good takeaways. And yeah, just keep living a green life and taking action. Every small action counts. And yeah, just keep being inspiring to everyone else around you. So have a great day and see you guys later.
Next workshop is at 12:30, so be sure to be on time for that. Thank you guys.
Bye. Thank you so much.